All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. This is Geoff with Fluent American checking in, and today we are focusing on presentations. A lot of my students are teachers or people that need to talk in meetings and things like that. So there are times when you need to present information, and we want to make sure that you're using phrases and things like that are going to be helpful for conveying information to your audience. So we're going to be focusing on giving presentations today. Now, as I go through these common expressions and things like that, I encourage you to, ask questions about pronunciation, about topic, but also off topic too. If you have other things related to English or pronunciation or other things too, like life or things like that, you can also let me know in the comments, and I'll do my best to respond as quickly as I can. Also, just a quick note, it is almost my son's nap time, so you may hear him in the background and things like that. Sorry. Okay, so with that said, let's get into our presentations and things. So we're talking about how to present in English. And probably the first way that you want to start anytime you're giving a presentation or a lecture or a talk is you want to introduce yourself. Just quick things, it doesn't have to be anything super complicated or long. Just saying, hi, my name is so and so. For instance, my name is Geoff. If you're giving a talk at in front of in a meeting or at a school or something like that, it might also be good to thank people who helped you, or if someone invited you to talk, to thank the person who invited you. Like you could say something like, "Oh, before we get started, I just wanted to thank whatever the person's name is." It also might be good. This is a great time to give some quick background on our talk. Hey, Sita, yes, we are live right now. So if you have questions, be sure to let me know. I know we started a little bit early today. So yeah, it might also be good to give some general background information on the topic really quickly, nothing super extended or long. Just maybe talking about how you found the topic, why you're interested in the topic, things like that. It's just some things to consider. Some quick pronunciation things like my name is. When you say my name is, make sure you're really stressing the word name. My name is. Also notice that M on name is going to link with is. Like my name is, my name is, my name is, and then give your person's name. Next one, I want to thank. I want to thank. Again, stresses on thank, so everything else is going to be reduced. Like I want to thank whoever. And then just in terms of phrases for that last part, you could say some quick background or just some quick backstory. You may hear the word backstory as well as background, just a note. Okay. Once you've done the introductions and you've talked about it, the next thing you can do is kind of prepare an outline. You want to give your audience an idea about what they're going to be talking about, what they're actually about to hear. Okay. So, for instance, some ways that you can show that you're going to summarize your discussion. You could say things like, in this talk, we will, for instance, you could say in this talk, we'll discuss different ways to give a presentation, right? Or in this talk, we're going to go over, let's use the phrasal verb go over. We're going to go over. If you have questions about anything here, let me know. I know as a teacher, I'm sure that this is somewhat of a relevant topic. So things we're going to go over, things we're going to discuss, things we're going to talk about, those are all different discussions. Yeah, give me a second to, I'm going to boost the volume of my microphone a bit. Just give me one moment. Okay, I boosted it there. Let me know if you can hear that a little bit better. Okay, I'll also bring it a little bit closer to me. We're going to get real friendly with the microphone. Okay. So again, you can say, I'll back up again. So in this talk, we'll discuss, we'll go over. You could also say things like, we're going to point out all the different things you need. So again, discuss, go over, point out. Those are all some common verbs that you can use. You can also say, we'll cover. So we're going to cover the following. We'll cover the following. We'll cover the following information. We'll cover different strategies to give presentations in English. Okay, so again, we started with the just introductions. Second part, talking about outlines, preparing your audience for what you're going to discuss. Typically, if you're using like PowerPoint or things like that, this is a great opportunity to show bullet points or like quick keywords to let your audience know what the different topics are for your outline. Another tip too, for instance, I have some students that are preparing for interviews, for instance, on the radio or with different publications. And when you're preparing for interviews, I really don't suggest making a script. Some people like to write down all the words that they're going to say. And I really don't recommend that. I would instead recommend just writing down keywords, because if you write down an entire script, there's the risk that you're going to sound less natural because you're going to memorize specific scripts, all the words for that, and that's going to just make you sound a little bit robotic, less spontaneous, less natural. If you just focus on keywords, you're like, okay, I know I need to talk about this, and I know I need to talk about this, then you'll still remember the key information because you're like, okay, I want to talk about these points. But every time you do it, it's going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. It's going to make it sound a little bit more natural because it's going to be more like a conversation rather than something that you've memorized and rehearsed. So again, for your outlines in this talk, we're going to talk about this. Here's the outline for today. Here's what we're going to cover. Here's what we're going to go over, and things like that. Now, if there's any questions here about any words, how they're pronounced, or things like that, be sure to let me know. Also, just a quick reminder, if things like this are helpful, practicing specific words or phrases, and you want to get corrections for how you sound, and you want to do this like every day, I definitely encourage you to check out our Telegram group. You can see this here in the middle option, where $5 a month gets you access, and basically every week, not every week, every single day, I give you a challenge, and then you can record audio, and then I give you feedback on how you sound. So if you want some real quick pronunciation practice every day, I think it's a great opportunity. Just some quick notes in the comments. Okay, people can hear me better, which is great. Also, appreciate the thoughts on the keywords. Yeah, I just think that, using keywords to remember times when you need to give a talk, I just think it's going to help you sound so much more natural. Because I was working with so many students, and they were working off of scripts and memorizing things, and it can make you sound like a robot. The other thing too is that if you memorize an entire script, like what happens if you forget? Like let's say you're like halfway through it, but then you forget what you wanted to say next. Well, what tends to happen is you then forget everything else too, and then like it just gets worse and worse and worse. But whereas if you're just focusing on keywords, you can even if you miss one keyword, at least you can just move on to the next one a little bit more easily. Gives you more flexibility. Now let's say that you're giving a talk and you want to link things chronologically. You want to link things in time. You're probably familiar with a lot of these words, but they are super helpful. Using, for instance, your numbers, so like first, second, third, things like that. So for instance, you can see that first one. The first thing was, and notice that when you say that, like the first thing, the second thing, the third thing, all those types of numbers, you want to make sure that you're stressing the number. So it's not going to be the first thing. It's going to be the first thing, the second thing, the third thing. The stress is going to be real heavy on the number. The word thing or point or whatever word you're using, that's usually going to be reduced and said faster. Okay, it's like the first thing, the first point, the first object. Next, other words. For instance, like then. It's like then we found that. It's like then we found that. And yeah, exactly. So like just some other words like then. You can also use adverbs of time. So for instance, like before, after, by the time, prepositions like that. Adverbs like that can be helpful also for organizing your time. Okay. Some other examples, again, you can see that next, after, and lastly. Just a quick note on lastly. Notice that T is usually not pronounced. Lastly. Quick note by Zubeda. More talk about keywords and things. Memorizing a TED Talk. Yeah, TED Talks, I'll be honest, TED Talks are not my favorite source of material because they're very artificial. Um, I get the attraction with TED Talks. They have a range of different topics. If you're looking for a very specific topic and you want to get educated on it, it can be very helpful. But I think for like just general listening practice, it's not going to be natural language because it is a speech. Okay, giving speeches or lectures, that's not how people really talk. So when I'm working with students, I tend to avoid them a little bit because the intonation patterns and the way that they speak is just not super natural. Just to kind of highlight some other resources that you may like. There's a series called StoryCorps, and I'll include some links in the chat that you can take a look at as well. I like to use these with students, one, because they're very, very short. You can see the lengths here, like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, like they're really short, not super long. And the other thing too is that they also have the transcript. You can see the transcript option. Okay, so for those of you who've even been in my native U workshops, we've used these in the past, where we're studying native speaker intonation and speech patterns. So you can see the transcript here. The talk's only 2 or 3 minutes long, like I said, and you can press play right here, and then you can listen to it. So that's one option I like to use. Another option I like is here. I'm not the biggest NPR fan personally, but in terms of like using content, there's a lot. So you can see here. I'll make this really big for a moment. These are all different podcasts that they have. All of these are different to talk about different things. So you can kind of just find one that you like. For instance, again, with my students, I use a lot of interviews. So we use Fresh Air. Fresh Air does a lot of interviews. And when you're doing this, you want to look for this symbol, the last little circle that has these lines, because that means it has a transcript. Okay. So then you can like look through these, find one that looks interesting, and then you can actually see the transcript, and then you can listen to it there. Okay. And again, that's going to be with NPR. So I would say if you're looking just for other types of listening material that also has like transcripts and things like that, those are two sources I use a lot with my students. Anyways, to kind of go back to our topic here. In terms of sequencing in time, you're trying to like show one thing happens, then another thing happens, then another thing happens. You want to show some order. Again, you can say like the first thing, then you can say then, use before, after, by the time, as soon as, next, after, lastly, just some words that you can use to signify order in what you're saying. Let's talk about some other situations. So maybe you're trying to show surprise or to show that a result was not expected. Okay, so maybe like you're describing research, or you're talking about a project or a plan where something happened that wasn't that you weren't fully expecting. What are some phrases that you can use, like to talk about those results that surprised you? Some expressions. You can say it caught us off guard. Caught us off guard. Notice that the only word you're really going to stress is guard. Caught us off guard. Off guard. Everything else is going to be slightly reduced. Okay, so caught us off guard. You could also say, for instance, the problem was unexpected. Something was unexpected. And again, this lets your audience know that this was new or something that was a surprise. Other phrases too, for instance, like despite or in spite of. It's like despite the problem, it worked. Or in spite of the problem, it worked. Things like that. So if you're trying to communicate that there were findings that you received that maybe you weren't entirely expecting to, these are some phrases that you can use. Caught us off guard, unexpected, despite, or in spite of. Okay, these are, again, there's other ways too, of course, but these are just some quick ones to consider to show that. A quick note too, when you're just in terms of, again, pronunciation a little bit. So like when you say like despite the problem or in spite of the problem, typically you're going to stress those words. So you're going to stress despite or in spite of. It's like despite the problem, it worked. Or in spite of the problem, it worked. It's pretty common to put the stress on those words in those phrases. Next, maybe you're just trying to show contrast. Okay, you're trying to compare two things. Again, maybe you're doing a research. You're analyzing research, explaining research, and there were two separate things that you're trying to compare and show the differences for. Okay. Some phrases you could use, for instance, like although. So, for instance, although they were fast, they lost. Another one, however. It's like they were fast, however, they lost. However is also a word that you can look at the punctuation here. Notice that semicolon and then that comma. This is a word that I see a lot of my students making mistakes with in punctuation, which is understandable. When you're using however to show this sort of contrast, you want to make sure that you have a semicolon, however, comma, okay, if it's in the middle of your sentence. You could also use a period, however, capital H, comma. Okay, but however needs either a comma or however needs either a period or a semicolon before it if it's showing contrast. The next one, you could also just use but. It's like they were fast, but they lost. Something like that. Okay, so they were fast, but they lost. Notice that with but, when you're using but to join two complete sentences, you're going to put a comma before it. But they lost. Also make sure that pronunciation-wise that your mouth is closed enough for it. You know, it's not bot, it's but. But. So again, not bot, but. Raising that mid back of your tongue, closing your mouth a little bit more. And again, it's like but. Okay. They were fast, but they lost. Notice that with the but too, again, it's just a comma, not a semicolon. Another phrase too, you could also use like, for instance, in contrast. One team was fast. In contrast, the other was slow. One team was fast. In contrast, the other was slow. Okay, so again, those are just some options you have to show the differences between two objects, or 2 points. The other side of that is if you want to focus instead on similarities between whatever you're describing. So for instance, first one, you could use both or both and. It's like both the boys and the girls perform well. Both the boys and the girls perform well. Okay. Stress here is actually really important because it can determine what you're trying to emphasize. It's like, for instance, both the boys and the girls performed well versus both the boys and the girls perform well. Like the and just makes that connection feel a lot stronger if you stress it. Again, both the boys and the girls performed well versus both the boys and the girls performed well. Okay, the second one's a little bit flatter, less exciting. Maybe the information is more of what you expected. Nothing really surprising about it. But if you say both the boys and the girls performed well, maybe you weren't expecting one of those groups to do well. We had a quick question here about commas with but. So, do we always need a comma before but? The short answer is no. This is going to happen when you're linking two independent clauses. So, for instance, we have the they were fast. That's a complete thought. They lost. That's also a complete thought. So when we add this but in between them, we need that comma. Okay. This is something that you're also going to, if you're reading things, native speakers don't always follow this rule. Okay, especially if they feel the context is really clear. And just also native speakers just tend to be not very good at commas, honestly. But yeah, the general rule is that if you're joining two complete thoughts, two independent clauses, you're going to put that comma before but. This is also true for and. Let me see if they... So for instance, in this one, boys performed well and girls did too. I could, if I wanted to, I could put a comma after well. Okay, unless you feel like the information is extremely clear and your reader's not going to be confused. But in theory, you could put a comma before and if you have two complete thoughts. Yeah, it's just something to kind of be mindful of. So yeah, we had both the boys and the girls performed well. Boys performed well and girls did too. Boys performed well and girls did too. Part of the reason that I think you don't really need a comma as much before and is because, especially with this too, I think it feels more connected, kind of joined together. Boys performed well and girls did too. Can you, looking at Zubayd's question, so I heard a native speaker said there's some things. So like a singular plural, like there's some things. I mean I would say it's non-standard. I think everyone's horrible at punctuation. Look at Citus comment as well. But punctuation is a tricky thing. It really should be like there are some things, honestly. However, I think it's also going to be pretty common to hear native speakers say things like there's some things. I think native speakers are going to do that a lot because in a lot of ways it's actually easier to say. Try saying there's some things versus there are some things. It's much easier, it's faster to say there's some things because you can link the S on theirs with the S on some, so you can kind of just keep going. But when you say there are some things, you have to say the there sound, so you get that first R, and then you have to say there are, and then you have to repeat that R sound, right? So that's just a little bit harder to say. So I think that's one reason why, like, subconsciously a lot of native speakers are going to say there's some things as opposed to there are some things. And no worries about off-topic questions. I think it's all related in a way. We're talking about English, right? But other things too. But yeah, so I think that yes, you will hear native speakers use that. Yes, it's non-standard grammar, but yes, it's extremely common. Okay. Next one for similarities. Besides winning yesterday, they won today. A real quick note on besides, because this is one I see in writing a lot. This is one of those transition words that my students make a ton of mistakes on. Like besides winning yesterday, they won today. It's like when you want to use besides in this sense of additional information or adding similarities, I really recommend adding words after besides to give some context. So for instance, besides winning yesterday, they won today. So they won yesterday, they won today. Besides winning yesterday, they won today. So this is a key thing with besides. You want to add that if you're meaning it for similarities, you want to add information after that. Okay. Just in contrast, because if you just put besides, then that has a slightly different meaning. For instance, if I give you the sentence, I'll give you two quick sentences. So for instance, like I wasn't invited to the party. Like I also had work. So like you could also say I wasn't invited to the party. Besides, I had work. Okay, so what this is a little bit different because what this means is that you couldn't have gone anyways. If you say besides, I had work, that means that hey, like I wasn't invited. I didn't go to the party for two reasons. I wasn't invited, and another reason is that I had work. Like I couldn't go. I couldn't go. I couldn't go because I had work. Okay, so like besides is gonna have slightly more of this sort of meaning if you just put besides by itself. Like you're introducing a whole new separate reason why you can't do something or why something didn't happen. Okay, so you just want to be careful with with besides. If you want besides to talk about similarities, just make sure that you add some words after it. It's like, again, besides winning yesterday, they won today. And how about our last one? In addition to the win, they received money. So you could also use like in addition to. So in addition to this, they got this. In addition to. And again, in terms of stress, you're going to stress the word addition. Okay. In addition to. Also watch out for those short I sounds, right? Lots of short I's here. It's like in addition. So it's not addition, it's addition. Addition. So just keep an eye on those short I sounds. Okay. Well, let me move this one over. It's a little bit cut off slightly. Okay. So maybe again, if you're talking about research that you did, that you finished, or maybe you're talking about, you're in a meeting and you're trying to talk about the results of a project or things like that, here are some phrases that you can use for these situations. Okay, so for instance, firstly, as a result of, okay? So like, as a result of our findings, we recommend something. As a result of our findings, You could also use consequently. Okay, the study received funding. Consequently, we could start. Okay, probably less common. You're not going to hear that as much in spoken English, but a possibility. Next one with the therefore. Our proposal was accepted. Therefore, we'll begin. And then the last word cut off there is begin. Notice that therefore is going to be a lot like however, which we saw earlier. So you need a semicolon, therefore, comma, or you could also use a period, therefore, comma. Your choice for those. Okay. And they gave suggestions and we'll act accordingly. Okay, so like accordingly is another way to show that you're talking about as a result. We'll act accordingly. We'll act based on the results. We'll act based on their suggestions. So because they gave suggestions, we're going to act. We'll do what they suggest. So that's what the accordingly means at the end of that. Okay. So Beta mentions that a lot of speakers pronouncing short eyes like long eyes. Yeah, I mean this is not just a Persian thing. It's an Arabic thing too. It's a Romance language thing. It's a Chinese thing. It's a Russian thing. Everybody is pronouncing the I sound like E. It's a super common issue that I see my students have, which is tricky because the short I sound is extremely common. So always watch out for your I sound, like again, like sit, to make sure you're not pronouncing it like E, like in seat. And unfortunately in English, that can cause some confusion. If you use an E sound where you need an I sound, that's going to change the meaning of what you're saying in a lot of situations. So just always be mindful of that. Okay. But again, talking about results. So again, as a result of, consequently, therefore, and then accordingly. Here are some just quick expressions you can use to show results. And then to conclude, so let's say you're finished with your talk. Somebody said you're definitely not alone. It's almost all my students, I feel, like 90 to 95% of them. When you're concluding, just some phrases. Again, typically when you're concluding, you want to summarize the things that you've discussed. So some ways you can do that. You could say, to conclude. So to conclude, we believe that the company should, spend money on this project. Okay. Another phrase, to sum up. It's like, to sum up, our research shows that, some other phrases too. All in all, our talk shows, and notice that all in all, you want to put the heavier stress on the second all, and a lot of times it's going to have rising intonation. In fact, I'm in the middle of making some intonation videos, but rising intonation on that all. All in all, our talk has shown, or that next one, for all of these reasons. Okay, so for all of these reasons, we believe that you should spend money on this product. Or for instance, last one, so in short, we believe, and again, the in short means that you're kind of just taking your whole talk and you're just summarizing it really quick. Okay, but these are all pretty common expressions that you're going to hear. And pay attention to these. For instance, if you're using TED Talks, towards the end of the presentation, you're probably going to hear a lot of these sorts of expressions as the speaker gets ready to wrap up or to finish. It's pretty common ways to show that you're concluding. Okay. If a talk is really long and really boring, these are the kinds of words that that you're always trying to listen for, honestly. Yeah. So they're mentioning things about mistakes from Brazilians. Yeah, I mean, Brazilians are, some big ones for Brazilians are especially the A sound and the S sound. For instance, taxes, Texas. That's actually what I have on my, I don't know if you guys see if it's mirrored, but it says taxes, Texas on my shirt. But yeah, so that's a common sound issue. Also long eyes, short eyes, TH sounds, things like that tend to be a little bit tricky. Zabeda asks, can I use these phrases in a normal discussion? So, probably wouldn't use to conclude. I probably wouldn't say to conclude. Maybe you could use sum up. I think all in all might work a little bit more informally. In short, you may be able to use a little bit more informally. Those would probably be your more your more common ones, honestly. I'll try and think of like some other ones that you can use informally. And thank you for liking the shirt. I like the shirt too. Yeah. So just to kind of wrap up, before we do, of course, if you're interested in studying these things in more detail, you want to practice your own writing, or you want to practice just pronouncing these, or practice giving a talk, you can always schedule a class. Going to fluentamerican.com. We have a lessons tab where you can see my schedule and then pick a time that works for you. It should adjust for time zones and things like that. So yeah, it'd be great to work with you in a class. Let's see again, just to kind of review. So again, you want to give a presentation. So you need to start. You say, like, hey, my name is Jeff. I want to thank all of you guys for being here and watching my video. Just to give some quick background on the topic, I've been working with a lot of writing and speaking students who need to give interviews or write papers or discuss their research. And so they're not sure basically how to kind of organize their speech or their talk. And so these are some strategies that you can use. In this talk, we're going to discuss phrases for comparisons, describing, again, similarities, but also contrasts, ways to organize your information in terms of time, and of course, how to conclude and end your video as well, or your talk. And again, you can check out the Patreon group. Now, some ways that you can organize your time. Well, firstly, you can use the words like first. Then you can use other systems as well. You can also use adverbs. So for instance, like before we could do this. You could also use like after. You can also use like next and lastly. And so, man, no worries. I totally understand. We do these classes here on YouTube too, like for people who don't have access to classes or time or money or whatever the reason is. It's great to have you guys here as well. There are also ways to show surprise. So for instance, catch someone off guard, or to be unexpected, or despite or in spite. So for instance, despite the issues, we can still meet on YouTube, regardless. You can also show contrast. For instance, again, they were fast, however, they lost. Or in contrast, the group lost. Of course, ways to show similarities too. For instance, like both and. And remember, you can play with that stress on the word and if you want to add some extra emphasis to your speech. You can also use words like to. With besides, if you're using besides to show similarities, my tip again was just make sure that you're adding some words after besides and not just using besides on its own. You can also use in addition to. And then for results. So again, as a result of this, consequently, or therefore, or accordingly. Those are common expressions for that. And then, of course, your conclusions, like to conclude, to sum up, all in all, situations like that. All right. I'm going to stay on for another minute or two, just see if anyone has any additional questions about presentations or giving talks in English. As I'm waiting for those, of course, I do want to thank you guys for joining me today. Be sure to check out our other videos as well, which go over pronunciation. Our next video is going to be talking about falling intonation, why you need to use falling intonation, what are situations that falling intonation will be very common for that you may or may not have learned in school or in classes with pronunciation teachers and things like that. Yeah, I'm going to be working on editing that video once I finish a couple classes today. But yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me today. I always appreciate seeing you. Zabeda, Zita, thank you guys for joining me. And of course, if you're watching this video a little bit later, if I didn't catch you and you had some questions, you can always leave a comment and I'll be happy to answer as soon as I can. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a good day, a good night, and a good afternoon. You take care.